founders Marcus and Joni Lamb from 2007 to 2011. And in that role, she saw up close and personal not just what happened at Daystar TV, but also within the Lamb family. And when these allegations came out.
For years, Joni Lamb was the untouchable face of Daystar. Until now, investigative journalist Julie Royce has uncovered a secret so shocking it's shaking the foundation of Christian media. Hidden money, silent boardrooms, and a betrayal no one saw coming. What Joni hoped would stay buried is now exploding into public view, and the truth is far more disturbing than anyone imagined. Brace yourself, because once you hear this, you'll never look at Daystar the same again. Julie Royce didn't set out to bring down one of the biggest Christian networks in America. But once she saw what was happening behind the scenes at Daystar, she couldn't look away. For years, Daystar had held a place of honor in Christian homes. Millions of people tuned in to hear messages of hope, prayer, and faith. Joni Lamb, the face of the network, was seen as strong, graceful, and deeply faithful, especially after the passing of her husband, Marcus Lamb. To many, she was a symbol of resilience. But all of that started to shift when Julie Royce, a well-respected investigative journalist known for exposing corruption in evangelical circles, started asking hard questions. Julie had a history with the Lamb family. From 2007 to 2011, she worked closely with both Marcus and Joni, gaining a front-row seat to the inner workings of Daystar. She wasn't just a reporter knocking on the door, she had already been inside. And when whispers began to surface about financial irregularities at the network, she knew something wasn't right. What she uncovered would shake the foundation of what many believed Daystar stood for. At first it was just small things, rumors of excessive spending, of donations being used for things that didn't line up with the ministry's mission. But soon, the pieces began to form a much darker picture. Julie started digging. She combed through financial documents, tax filings, and public records. She spoke with former employees, some willing to talk, others scared but desperate to be heard. What they revealed was troubling. There were stories of money being used for luxury purchases, lavish travel, and even political involvement that threatened Daystar's nonprofit status. One of the biggest red flags was the purchase of a private jet. On the surface, Daystar claimed it was necessary for global ministry work, but Julie found that the funds used for it came straight from donations. These weren't investments made with extra budget money. They were paid for by viewers, regular people giving out of faith, trusting that every dollar would go toward helping others, not buying planes.
We got back from our honeymoon. It was in July. And by the way, there are questions about, it's all over the internet, that Daystar paid $100,000 for my
Yes, I was getting ready to ask you about that.
So absolutely not. Not one penny of Daystar's money was used for our honeymoon. We paid for our honeymoon, okay? So again, that's another lie that's out there.
But the jet wasn't the only concern. Julie uncovered a pattern of financial choices that seemed more about power and image than ministry. She found discrepancies in how donations were reported, questioned the network's handling of tax-exempt privileges, and discovered ties to political movements that seemed far removed from the gospel Daystar claimed to preach. Former staff confirmed the worst, that some leaders within the ministry were living in luxury while pushing aggressive fundraising tactics to the public. One particularly heartbreaking story came from a woman who answered phones during a telethon. She told Julie about an elderly caller in tears, saying she was in debt but felt compelled to donate her last $1,000 after a preacher on TV promised God would return 10 times the amount. That moment, the staffer said, changed everything. It no longer felt like faith. It felt like exploitation. Julie kept going, and her reports grew louder. She wasn't just reporting facts. She was uncovering a culture. A culture where leaders at Daystar operated more like executives of a for-profit empire than spiritual guides. As she pieced it all together, it became clear this wasn't just one mistake. It was systemic. A way of doing business behind the curtain that no one was supposed to see. And yet, Julie saw it. She didn't just bring light to it. She blasted it into public view. The impact was immediate. People who had supported Daystar for years felt blindsided. Many began to pull back donations. Churches distanced themselves. Viewers asked questions, and the answers weren't comforting. Julie had done more than investigate. She'd broken the silence. She showed that, even in Christian media, where trust is sacred, accountability is still essential. And when that accountability disappears, the people paying the price aren't the ones at the top. They're the ones giving from the bottom, out of faith, hope, and trust. Julie's reporting didn't come without criticism. Some said she was attacking the church. Others claimed it was a smear campaign. But Julie never backed down. Her focus was clear: the truth. And the truth she uncovered sent shockwaves far beyond Daystar. It made people think. It made ministries nervous. And most of all, it forced a long overdue conversation about integrity in the world of faith-based broadcasting, because when someone finally pulls back the curtain, you can't pretend not to see what's behind it.
They do the semi-annual telethon there. I think they call it Heart for the World now. There's a room there just full of phones and cubicles and several hundred people in there that just answer phones all day. And the prayer department was in charge of taking the calls during the telethon when people would call in to donate. But every once in a while, the call volume would be so high that all company employees would be required to be on standby on their phone. And so this was one of those particular occasions. The call volume was exceptionally high. And lo and behold, my phone rang. I answer it, and it's this sweet little elderly lady, and she's weeping, and she's telling me that she's completely in debt. She has nothing, no money, but she does have a last little bit on her credit card, and she's going to give that to Daystar because the person on air said that if you give $1,000 today, God is going to give you $10,000 back. I don't really have words to say how horrible I felt in that moment, that I took that card number and I ran that card, because it just felt very, very wrong. And that was really the first time that I stopped and said, do I want to be a part of this? Is this the kingdom of God? Because I don't know how you can justify that before.
It started with a plane. Not just any plane, a private jet. For most people, a private jet is the symbol of luxury, power, and excess. And when it was revealed that Daystar, a Christian television network built on the donations of ordinary believers, had purchased one, it didn't sit right. The news landed like a thunderclap. People had sent their last dollars in envelopes, believing they were giving to God's work. But those same dollars may have bought plush leather seats, catered meals, and fuel for cross-country flights. At first, the network tried to justify the purchase. They said it was a tool for ministry, a necessity for global outreach. And yes, Daystar did have a massive reach. Their hosts traveled the world, appearing at conferences, filming at mission sites, and hosting fundraisers. But when Julie Roys, the investigative journalist who started peeling back the layers of Daystar's finances, dug into the jet's backstory, the pieces didn't add up. This wasn't a simple business decision. It looked like a move to support a lifestyle, not a mission. Julie found that the jet wasn't just used for ministry travel. It was used privately. It was a quiet perk for those at the top. It wasn't long before people began asking a dangerous question. Was Daystar becoming more of a business than a ministry? And that question didn't just stay in the corners of online forums or quiet living rooms. It spread fast. Viewers were angry. Some had given out of poverty. Others had tithed for decades. Now they were wondering if their sacrifices had built someone else's empire. But the jet was just the beginning. The deeper Julie looked, the more troubling things she found. For years, Daystar had operated under the legal classification of a church. That designation gave it tax-exempt status and allowed it to avoid filing Form 990S, public financial disclosures, required of most nonprofits. In simple terms, that meant no one could see where the money was going. No one could check how much was being spent on salaries, events, personal perks, or political causes. Everything was behind a curtain. That alone raised alarms. Ministries that accept public donations usually open their books to prove they're being responsible. But Daystar didn't have to, and under Joni Lamb's leadership, it didn't. The secrecy only made people more suspicious. If you're doing everything right, why hide the records? Then came the politics. Daystar had always leaned conservative, but Julie's reports revealed just how closely the network had tied itself to political movements. During major election cycles, Daystar aired programming that openly supported specific candidates. In some cases, network hosts appeared at political rallies. Political guests were given airtime not to speak about faith, but to push campaigns and agendas. The IRS has clear rules about this. Churches and ministries are allowed to speak on moral issues, but if they directly support political candidates, they risk losing their tax-exempt status. Yet Daystar seemed to walk that line boldly, and sometimes crossed it. The network blurred the line between preaching and politicking, and for some viewers, that was the final straw. They didn't donate to support political campaigns, they donated to hear the gospel, to pray, to support missions and humanitarian aid. As more information came out, a sense of betrayal began to grow. Joni Lamb, who had been seen as a matriarch of Christian television, was now the face of a network that looked more like a corporation than a church. She had spent years speaking about integrity, family, and faith, but now her credibility was under fire. Her explanations for the jet and other financial decisions felt hollow. She said the plane was a tool for ministry, but she didn't explain why it had been kept so quiet. She said the network followed the law, but she didn't offer to open the books. And as more people started asking questions, Daystar's response was silence. The backlash was swift. Donors stopped giving. Churches removed Daystar's programming from their schedules. Social media lit up with people sharing their own stories of giving to the network, and now regretting it. The jet became a symbol of something bigger, the moment when Daystar lost touch with its mission. And the Daystar. Some former employees came forward too. They described a culture that had shifted over time. In the early days, Daystar felt like a calling. People worked long hours, prayed together, and believed they were building something holy. But as the network grew richer, things began to change. Budgets grew, priorities shifted, and the focus on spreading faith gave way to protecting an image. Employees began to notice who got raises, who got access, who traveled on the jet, and who didn't. The gap between leadership and staff widened. There were whispers of luxury, expensive clothes, lavish dinners, first-class accommodations, all of it covered under the Daystar name. But without financial transparency, it was impossible to confirm the scale. That lack of answers only deepened the wounds. People didn't just want to know what was happening. They felt they had a right to know, because it was their money, their faith, their trust. The political involvement hurt too. Many supporters of Daystar came from different backgrounds. Some were conservative, others were not. But they all believed they were supporting a ministry, not a campaign. When the network started pushing political messages, it created division where there used to be unity. Some viewers stopped watching altogether. Others felt Daystar had become part of a machine. Less about God, more about power. The hardest part, for many, was watching someone they admired become so unrecognizable. Joni Lamb had been a symbol of strength, especially after Marcus's death. She had held the network together, continued the mission, and stood on that stage like a rock. But now, people weren't sure who she really was. Was she in control? Did she know how the money was being spent? Or worse, was she the one approving it? Joni made a few statements defending the network. She said the media was twisting the facts. She said the ministry was still doing good work. But what she didn't say spoke louder. There was no apology, no financial breakdown, no admission of mistakes, just vague reassurances that everything was fine. And people were tired of being told to trust without proof. Julie Roys, for her part, didn't back down. She kept publishing reports, interviewing sources, and laying out the facts. Her work wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. And whether people loved her or hated her, she had done what no one else dared to do. She had pulled back the curtain and exposed the truth. In the end, it wasn't just about a jet or politics. It was about integrity, about a network that had started with faith and ended up tangled in secrecy. It was about donors who believed they were supporting God's work and found out they were funding luxury. It was about leaders who preached transparency but practiced silence. And for many, it was about waking up and realizing that even ministries can fall when no one is watching the money. The fallout is still happening. Daystar may still be broadcasting. Joni may still be on TV. But the trust is gone. And once that's broken, it's hard to get back. Because at the heart of every ministry is not just a message, but a promise. A promise to be honest, faithful, and true to the people who believe. And that promise, once broken, changes everything. For years, Joni Lamb was untouchable. She was more than just the co-founder of Daystar, she was its heart. To millions of viewers, Joni was a steady, loving presence who smiled through pain, stood strong through crisis, and continued her husband Marcus Lamb's mission after his death. She wasn't just a broadcaster, she was a spiritual leader, a role model, and, to many, a symbol of unwavering Christian strength. Her show, Joni Table Talk, featured stories of faith, redemption, and courage. She listened with compassion, spoke with conviction, and seemed above the kind of drama that plagued other religious leaders. But then, everything began to fall apart. When investigative journalist Julie Royce began digging into Daystar's finances, Joni became the central figure in a growing storm. It wasn't just about the network anymore. It was about the woman leading it. Joni had always been seen as graceful, humble, and selfless, but Julie's findings raised questions that put Joni in a very different light. There were reports of luxury spending, questionable use of donor funds, and ties to political campaigns, and behind all of it stood Joni Lamb, defending the network and herself, but not with the clarity people were hoping for. At first, Joni tried to remain poised. She issued a few statements, gave brief interviews, and made emotional appeals to her audience. She talked about legacy, about God's favor, and about staying focused on faith during hard times. But the answers she gave didn't match the scale of the accusations. When asked about the private jet purchased with donations, she said it was necessary for ministry travel, but never explained why there had been no transparency about it. When questioned about Daystar's political involvement, she brushed it off as part of the ministry's broader mission, but didn't address the risk of violating its nonprofit status. And as the pressure mounted, her public image began to show cracks. What made it worse was the contrast. For years, Joni had spoken openly about accountability, stewardship, and living with integrity. Her words were strong, but now people were comparing those words to her actions, and the gaps were becoming impossible to ignore. Viewers who had followed her for decades began to feel conflicted. Was this the same Joni they had trusted with their prayers, their money, their faith, or had they only seen what she wanted them to see? Her supporters rallied behind her at first. They said she was being unfairly targeted, that the media was twisting the truth, that this was spiritual warfare, plain and simple. But even they started asking questions when Joni failed to offer full transparency. Why wasn't she opening the books? Why wasn't she answering directly? Why was everything so vague? Behind the scenes, more former Daystar employees began speaking out. They described a culture of control where loyalty to leadership was prized above integrity. Some said they had tried to raise concerns and were shut down. Others said they stayed silent out of fear of losing their jobs, or worse, being labeled as enemies of the ministry. And as these voices grew louder, Joni's silence became more damning. People were no longer just disappointed, they were angry. Angry that their donations may have funded a lavish lifestyle. Angry that they were being asked to give more money without getting honest answers. Angry that someone they had trusted for years might have betrayed that trust. Joni's brand had always been one of strength and sincerity, but now, every public appearance felt like damage control. Her calm voice seemed rehearsed, her smiles felt strained. And no matter how many scriptures she quoted or how many tears she shed, the weight of public doubt grew heavier. Social media turned brutal. Posts defending Joni were flooded with angry replies. Hashtags calling for accountability trended in Christian circles. People started sharing old clips of Joni Table Talk, pointing out the irony of her past sermons about truth and stewardship. Every move she made was picked apart. Every silence treated like guilt. It wasn't just a PR crisis, it was a spiritual one. For many believers, seeing Joni fall was like watching a part of their own faith unravel. And yet, through all of it, Joni didn't step aside. She didn't announce a leave of absence or offer an internal investigation. Instead, she doubled down. She framed the situation as an attack on the gospel, not a response to misconduct. She spoke of trials and persecution, but what she didn't do was acknowledge the pain of the people who had once stood by her. The single mothers who donated what little they had, the elderly women who called the prayer lines in tears, the families who tuned in every night believing Daystar was different. Joni's refusal to address the allegations with transparency felt like a betrayal of all of them. In many ways, Joni's image didn't collapse because of what Julie Royce uncovered. It collapsed because of how Joni responded to it. Her silence spoke louder than her words. Her defensiveness felt out of touch, and her unwillingness to fully open the books and face the truth head-on shattered the myth that she was somehow above reproach. Once beloved as a voice of strength, Joni Lamb now stood at the center of one of the biggest scandals in Christian media. And while the network continued to broadcast, the damage to her reputation was lasting. She had built a public persona on trust, humility, and faith. But when the pressure came and the spotlight turned harsh, that image crumbled, slowly painfully, and very publicly. The scandal surrounding Daystar and Joni Lamb didn't just shake one ministry, it shook an entire community. Churches across the country suddenly found themselves split. People who had worshipped together for years now sat on opposite sides of a growing argument. Some believed Joni was being unfairly targeted by the media, while others felt deeply betrayed and demanded answers. It wasn't just about $100,000 0 cents or a private jet. It was about trust, faith, and what it means to be held accountable when you lead in God's name. In small groups and church foyers, the conversations were raw and emotional. "She's done so much good. Why would she lie now?" some asked. Others responded with, "Doing good doesn't excuse hiding the truth." For many, it felt like a personal crisis. They had given their money, their time, their prayers. They had watched Daystar in hospital waiting rooms, during lonely nights or in moments of spiritual need. It wasn't just a network to them, it was family. And now, that family felt broken. Pastors were put in difficult positions. Some tried to stay neutral, urging people to pray for everyone involved. Others took a stand, calling out the lack of transparency and asking their congregations to reconsider where their donations were going. Even entire churches began re-evaluating whether to promote Daystar or distance themselves from the controversy. In some places, it caused heated debates. In others, quiet exits. People walked away not just from the network, but sometimes from the church itself.